Igbo ọma na-ege ntị, anyị ekenekwa unu ọzọ n'ụbọchị uhuruchi nke taa. Anyị sị ka ụbọchị nke taa mara nnụnụ mma. Anyị si ka nkọ echiri ezelu. Anyị si ndụ mmiri ndụ azụ. Mmiri atara m azụ anwụrụ. Ise ise ise. Dịka o si dị, a sị na ọ ya dịrị anyị Igbo na mma. Na ọ ya dịrị anyị Igbo na mma. Na ọ ya dịrị anyị Igbo na mma. Ise. O were ya wetara unu n'ebe akwụkwọ na Eastern News 24 n'ụbọchị nke taa. Tata bụ 13th of June 2024. O nwere ife wetara unu n'iru akwụkwọ. Anyị ga-achọkwa unu ga ya bụ ife a bụ gbasịta maka ife nwanne anyị nwaanyị kwuru. Nwanne anyị nwaanyị bụ Oby Ezekwesili kwuru n'iru akwụkwọ. Ya bụ ife o kwuru erika, mana ọ bụrụ ife anyị ga-abịa ikwu ebe a. Ọ mere anyị ji sị na anyị ga-etinyere unu ya bụ ife ka unu gee ya. Unu ga-esi ya bụ ife nwanne anyị nwaanyị kwuru. Unu etinyere anyị alụ nke unu, ife unu chere n'ụdị nke unu gbasịta maka ihe niile nwanne anyị nwaanyị kwuru n'ilu akwụkwọ dị iche iche. Dịka na-aga ya bụ ife ka bana arụkọ drop your own comment on the comment below. Right, over to you, ma.
The development of not just our country but our continent, and with an eye to the world. So, and I want to also recognize our dear General Ike Nwachukwu, an officer and a gentleman. You will continue to be that. That's how we knew you, and you continue to represent that. And of course, to all the people on this high table, I say thank you for the opportunity of being part of this event. Wale, I want to pay you special tribute for your persistency in gathering us every year. I recall the year that you gathered us to begin that conversation around a third force. I also remember the year you gathered us and you recognized a number of us that had been in the trenches for our democracy. Many of us got beaten on the streets of this same Lagos fighting for democracy. We can never forget the history of how we got to democracy. So I want to say congratulations to all Nigerians that we actually are in a political system that is meant for our political liberty, for participation, anchored on the rule of law, even though it falls way below the standard of what gives democracy its full credentials of being called a full electoral democracy. We still do know that the fact that we can gather and we can have this kind of a conversation is a little indication of the kind of liberty that democracy presents. As a matter of fact, every time that you look at the scores of our continent in global democracy measurements, you find that our continent is still struggling to establish a full democratic credentials. A recent piece of study by the Afrobarometer on the state of democracy on our continent shows that our citizens across the continent, 70% of them believe that democracy is the system of governance, the political system that they most prefer. So clearly, Africans want democracy. Now, they only 44% of Africans say that democracy is supplying them with full democracy. So there's a gap. There's we love democracy, and then there is a very sharp decline in terms of people feeling a sense that democracy is actually delivering, supplying them with full democracy. And the number of them that say that they are satisfied with democracy in their countries, the average percentage was even lower than 44, about 42%. That tells us that the journey to having democracy, properly so-called, the kind of democracy that is anchored on the rule of law, that rule of law, the idea of constitutionalism in the democratic process is the reason I absolutely adore you, Uncle Emeka, because we must not practice democracy in the breach. Evidence abound that where democracy has been fully practiced as democracy, that it correlates to economic freedom. Political freedom in its fullness, in a full democracy, correlates to economic freedom. Economic freedom correlates to innovation and enterprise and the productivity of each individual in society. The biggest problem of our continent, and especially our country, is the productivity problem. That productivity problem is the reason that we make little progress in terms of our economic well-being, and then we relapse into a complete collapse of progress that may be fledgling, but at least had been made once upon a time. And because we do not pay attention to the cataclysmic effect that not having the right anchors of full democracy, leading to economic freedom, to enterprise, to the idea of open societies that enable people to put their best foot forward in participating in the development process, what we have had across Africa has been a democracy that is monopoly democracy. Monopoly democracy is essentially the democracy that has been captured by the few in the political class that form the supply side of democracy. They are the suppliers of democracy, but they operate on a political culture that gives them monopoly over this triangular space that includes the demand side being their citizens, their electorate, and they on the supply side, and at the apex of that triangle, you have the regulatory, constitutional, legislative systems and institutions that should regulate the relationship between those who supply democracy and those who demand for democracy. This disconnect has been the reason that a political culture of impunity exists in our country. It does exist in many other countries in Africa because the features are similar. However, when we recognize the importance of regional influence, we will then know how much of a disservice Nigeria does to Africa. Nigeria, by not being a full democracy that enables the concept of good governance, which is the basis upon which sound policies and the right institutions and the right choices of investments that deliver what we call the dividends of democracy, has set a bad example. When we remember that for every 1% of economic growth in Nigeria, there is a 0.5% of economic growth for the rest of Africa, then we understand the disservice that our country does to the rest of the continent. Therefore, on Democracy Day, we should be asking ourselves the question, what is it that keeps us from having the standard and quality of democracy that goes beyond the 4.12% of the score of Africa in a global democracy measurement? The Economic Intelligence Unit of The Economist publishes every year a democracy index that is a global instrument. And in measuring our continent, we are operating at a low score of about 4.12% in 2022. In 2006, when that measure first came into place, our continent was scoring about 4.38%. Over the years, it's been on the decline. So we have democratic decline, we have democratic backsliding. The rest of the world is suffering democratic backsliding. Authoritarianism is growing in Europe. We see the things that are happening in America, but it is worse for Africa. It is worse for Nigeria not to have full democratic credentials. To that extent, therefore, I was it that the conversation that changes this entrapment in a low equilibrium performance of democracy and economic outcomes can only be moved? A seismic shift of our current circumstance is only possible when the citizens take back the stage for designing democracy. Because after all, democracy, as properly defined by Abraham Lincoln, is democracy is the government for the people, by the people, and of the people. And right now, in most of the political systems that are practiced on our continent, that is far from it. It is purely democracy is governance by a few politicians, for a few politicians, by a few politicians, or of a few politicians. And that is the basis of the briefulness of society. Our country is brittle. My most important speech, part of my speech today, dear Chairman and members of the High Table, is to stress the urgency of rescuing Nigeria. We must rescue Nigeria immediately. We have no space for experimentation anymore. And that is why what you have canvassed, which is what I have consistently canvassed, and in a recent article earlier this year, I did say to Nigerians, what time is it for Nigeria? The time is up. The fact is that when you look at the performance of Nigeria on the fragility index of countries around the world, you would find that Nigeria has consistently come within the region of the first 12, 13 countries that are most fragile. That fragility index tells us a story. A consistency of poor performance on the fragility index has a sell-by date. It is totally unsustainable. It is unviable for our country to remain in that region of the strength or weakness of societies. This lack of resilient systems as a bulwark for the basis of how governance is offered is already a very clear and dangerous signal to us that if we do not immediately get the citizens to the center of the design of a Nigeria that understands democracy and practices the full ethos, the values, the principles, the practices, the structures, the systems, the institutions of democracy, we fool ourselves. It is a fool's paradise, and it is a dangerous one. We cannot sleep while Nigeria careens into a failed state. That is the most dangerous situation. So I portend, therefore, that there are two possibilities for us: a managed chaos or an unmanaged chaos. We are at a place where the economics and the security of the citizens are colliding with the political imperfections. When you have these three drivers going in the direction they go, we have seen the experiences of other countries. It leads nowhere but a collapse. We must rescue the situation. There are three demographics that have passed through and currently passing through in Nigeria in terms of demographics of our people. There was the demographics of the older generation of the nationalists, with some of them still being alive. They were the demographic that fought the struggle. Their liberation struggle was for us to be independent, to gain independence from the colonialists. They got independence. Then another demographic came along, the baby boomers, of which I am part of them, born in 1963, now 61. That generation fought a liberation struggle. Our liberation struggle was to get ourselves out of what Uncle Emeka rightly described to us in the story of the imprisonment of one who won an election and instead of being sworn in as a president ended up dying for democracy. That liberation from militarization and dictatorships was the next demographic that fought a liberation struggle. Now we have a third demographic. That third demographic, they are made up of the Gen X generation, the millennials, and the Gen Z generation. These three generations are now the ones who have another liberation struggle that stares them in the face. And that struggle is a struggle of gaining independence from a political class that has an entrenched culture of subordinating and subverting the common good of the country to their own little personal and narrow interests. This divide between narrow interests, personal interests, and the common good of society, the collective good of society, this disconnect, this divergence of it is what we see of a Nigeria that struggles to even achieve the minimum of scores in terms of its human development. Without Nigeria's human development increasing from where it has found itself, there is no basis to discuss Nigeria's productivity and competitiveness. Therefore, we must design a new Nigeria. To design a new Nigeria, we cannot do it in the way we've done it in the past, where a few wise people appoint themselves to a committee and then write a constitution for the rest. It's not viable, no longer viable. This demographic of the Gen X, the Gen Zs, the millennials have come of age. All the sick of us, the rest of the demographics that are still alive, all they seek of us is to accompany them on this journey of liberation, because they must liberate themselves from poor governance. They must step out there and take the center stage of citizens' design of democracy that delivers. And therefore, I completely say to every one of you, I am a strong voice for a new constitution, a constitutional process that, driven by the people, centered around the people, and for which those who have so far captured democracy have no choice but to respond positively. We do need to start the journey even now. It's already late, but not too late. We can still have a Nigeria where the National Assembly understand their true role as the symbol of democracy. Because, frankly, without a National Assembly, you are not a democracy. You can have a judiciary, you can have an executive in any system of government. But it is only in democracy that we have a National Assembly, the parliament of the people. To that extent, therefore, we must understand the import of having our National Assembly stop being irresponsible. There is an irresponsibility on the part of our National Assembly where most of their conversations would always be around their own economic empowerment, with a total neglect of the fact that society for which they have been made public leaders is brittle and in a place of sharp divide and possible collapse. So being responsible would be this to me. The National Assembly must understand that that provision on how to amend the Constitution that it tinkers around with will not deliver a Nigeria that works for us. It cannot. You can't continue to tinker with a faulty Constitution and hope that somehow it will work. It will never work. It will only deliver the suboptimal results that we have so far seen in the performance of Nigeria. So the National Assembly must take its responsibilities serious. It needs to really slow down from all the too much activities pretending to do something that moves the country forward, slow down and be contemplative. And then to spend time and to actually acknowledge that there have been people in this country, citizens, that have been long suffering. The citizens of Nigeria have had abiding faith and confidence in their public leaders. For how long are you going to drag them out in a state of low equilibrium economic prospects, in a place where the dignity of their human life is now below zero, in a place where their human development possibilities have eroded massively? No, there's a sell-by date for citizens to continue to depend and to hope that its leaders will finally get the sense to do right by them. The National Assembly must understand that the younger generation of Nigerians are tired, exhausted. They really want a Nigeria that works. They are a generation that are interested in seeing governance on the basis of good governance, not just governance. Because of that, therefore, I propose to the National Assembly a one-issue amendment of the current constitution to enable the process that Chief Emeka Anyaoku just laid out. A single-issue amendment that basically says that the new amendment enables that process of an assembly that is with citizens at the center of it, in the credible way of constituting that assembly for the constitutional process, and a provision within that single issue amendment allowing for the for the people of Nigeria to vote for each item that is presented before them. The ownership of a new constitution on this basis will radically transform the way that we live. Why? Because in constitutional processes, a key thing is the spirit of the Constitution. And that key thing about the spirit of the Constitution is that a Constitution enables the people to agree their shared values. What shared values are we running on as a country? If I asked you, what's our shared values? Well, evidence has shown that societies that articulated their shared values, where everybody owned those shared values, have done better than other countries. We discuss our shared values. We discuss our national vision. What vision are we aspiring to? What do we want to see of Nigeria in the next 50 years, in the next 100 years? What kind of picture of Nigeria do we see collectively, regardless of our multi-plurality, as Chief Emeka Anyaoku rightly said? It is, what's our national vision? Do you know anything that is so-called? We don't have it. This process would be what enables us to get there. And then the matter of our agreed identity, as diverse as we are, our identities are unique to us and they are important. We must not allow any of us be ashamed of our identities. But we are people in a common territory called a country. In fact, the credentials for being a country is now eluding us. It's fast eluding us. The global definition of country is fast eluding us. We have too many ungoverned spaces in our country. We have the weakness of an economy where the macroeconomic condition is too deleterious for the survival of the people. We have massive poverty that traps majority of the citizens. That we have a security system that is not what would normally qualify to make us a country. We have a bureaucracy that is no longer as competent as it once was in the time that people like you were in government, Chief Emeka Anyaoku and you Ikenwachukwu. So we have all the indicators that show a downward slide. The only way we can get ourselves back is really through a process that enables this kind of conversation on our shared values, on our national vision, and our common identity. because we will end up agreeing that this is what makes us Nigerians. And this is that identity. I can keep my identity as a Christian, as an Igbo woman, as a female, and all of that, but there is a common identity that I can agree with any other person from any other part of this country. It is part of the reason, it is a key reason that the citizens must be at the center of the process that I canvass for. Because you can't continue to pretend that our politicians know better than the people they govern. No, it doesn't exist. Well, they have done it for so long. What is the result? The result speaks for itself, that they cannot, on their own, determine what changes our society. So, in this process that I am outlining, I do think that at the center of it would then be the discussion of the Nigeria, the new Nigeria, that all of us subscribe to. All of us will put our best foot forward to upholding. A new Nigeria that we would be so bold to work, because it would be a conversation that would take us to the importance and criticality of quality leadership to govern us. Quality leadership that is ethical, that is competent, and that is capable. Without character, competence, and capacity, it is impossible to build a decent society. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I want to be seen clearly to endorse the necessity for the commencement of a new constitution with the National Assembly and the presidency moving, because we have to move according to what the Constitution lays out. They must take that move, because if they don't, they want an unmanaged chaos. It is already on us, because look at what happens every day in our country today. It's an unmanaged chaos. You don't want massive unmanaged chaos. And so it is said in the Bible that wisdom is profitable to direct. Thank you very much.
Ndị be anyị ekenekwanụ m unu dịka unu si wee na-esonyekwana anyị na ya na-eme n'elu akwụkwọ na Eastern News 24. Anyị sikwa na Chukwuka abịa ma ya nọrọ nche niile n'ofu n'ofu dịka unu si wee na-esonyere anyị n'elu akwụkwọ. Dịka o si dị, unu anụgonu ka ya bụ ife si wee gbata wee kwụrụ, unu anụgonu ihe nwanne anyị nwoke kwuru n'elu akwụkwọ. Ka efi were ikwu gbasịta maka ya bụ ihe ndị a niile nụgasị niile nwanne anyị kwugasị gbasịta maka open grazing bill. Kabaruke drop your own comment on the comment section below. Thank you, and also stay tuned at Eastern News 24. Kemesiano Munem.